My name is Mike, and this is the story of how my seemingly perfect life came crashing down. I'd been married to Sarah for almost a decade, and we had what I thought was a strong, loving relationship. We had two beautiful twin daughters, Emma and Olivia, and a home filled with laughter, love, and dreams for the future. My best friend, Tom, had been part of our lives for as long as I could remember. He was like family, someone I trusted completely. But looking back now, I realized that the cracks had been forming long before the dam broke. Sarah had started acting differently, nothing obvious at first, just little things that didn't seem important at the time. She'd become more secretive with her phone, laughing at messages she never shared. She was busy more often and spent a lot of time out with friends. I thought she was just overwhelmed, juggling work and family life, but the distance between us was growing, and I didn't know why. I trusted her, though. I trusted her completely. After all, she was my wife and the mother of my children. And Tom? He was my brother in everything but blood. It never crossed my mind that the two people I loved and trusted the most could betray me in the worst way imaginable. But life has a cruel way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. And when the truth came out, it shattered everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and loyalty. The discovery wasn't a single, dramatic moment, it was a slow, gut-wrenching unraveling of the truth. It started with little things that didn't sit right, but I dismissed them because I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling. Sarah had always been independent, and I prided myself on respecting her space. But then, the little things started to pile up. One evening, I noticed Sarah smiling at her phone. Her smile wasn't the casual kind you have when scrolling through funny memes or chatting with a friend. It was soft and private, the kind of smile you share with someone who means something special. I asked her who she was texting, and she brushed it off, saying it was a group chat with coworkers. Something about the way she avoided eye contact made my chest tighten, but I let it go. Then came the late nights. Sarah started coming home later and later, always with excuses that seemed just a bit too rehearsed. "Work's been crazy," she'd say, or "Lisa needed someone to talk to, so I stayed over for a while." I wanted to believe her, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. It's funny how your instincts can scream at you when your heart refuses to listen. The breaking point came when I found a receipt tucked into her purse. I wasn't snooping, it fell out when I grabbed her bag to move it off the couch. It was from a restaurant we'd never been to, dated the night she'd told me she was out with Lisa. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a work dinner. Maybe she and Lisa tried somewhere new. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling, so I started paying closer attention. One day, I noticed that she was wearing perfume to run errands, something she hadn't done in years. She'd also started dressing up more often, even on days when she claimed to be working from home. I felt like I was losing my mind, second-guessing everything she said and did. It wasn't until I caught a glimpse of her phone screen that my suspicions were confirmed. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to take a shower. I wasn't proud of it, but I picked it up and opened her messages. The first thing I saw was a text from Tom. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." My heart stopped. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I scrolled up through their conversation, and it was all there, every lie, every secret meeting, every betrayal. They'd been seeing each other for months, sneaking around behind my back while I worked late shifts and cared for our daughters. I felt sick. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the floor, clutching the phone like it was some kind of lifeline. The room spun around me as the weight of what I'd just discovered pressed down on my chest. Tom, my best friend, my brother in everything but blood, had been sleeping with my wife. In that moment, I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that the two people I trusted most in the world had been lying to my face. All those family dinners, All those times Tom had held my daughters and called them his little princesses, it was all a lie. I heard the water shut off in the bathroom and quickly put the phone back on the counter. My mind was racing. What was I supposed to do? Confront her? Pretend I didn't know? My body was frozen, but my emotions were on fire: rage, heartbreak, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of loss. When Sarah walked into the kitchen, I could barely look at her. She smiled at me like nothing was wrong, kissed me on the cheek, and started talking about dinner plans. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I just nodded and went through the motions, but inside, I was already plotting how I was going to confront her, and Tom. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every interaction, every little moment that now felt tainted by betrayal. The anger boiled inside me, threatening to spill over, but I knew I had to stay calm. If I confronted Sarah in the heat of the moment, I'd lose control, and I needed answers more than I needed to scream. The next day, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront her. I waited until the girls were at school and Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee. She looked so normal, so at ease, scrolling through her phone like everything was fine. It made me sick. I sat down across from her and said, "Sarah, we need to talk." She glanced up at me, a little startled by the seriousness in my tone. "What's wrong?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to steady my voice. "Are you seeing someone else?" Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw a panic flash across her face. But she recovered quickly, putting on an expression of confusion. "What? Mike, what are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice firmer now. "I saw the messages on your phone. From Tom." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. That silence was louder than anything she could have said. My hands clenched into fists under the table, and I fought the urge to shout. "How long, Sarah? How long has this been going on?" She stammered, "Mike, I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt, Sarah. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. You lied to me. You lied to our family." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. "Not yet. It started a few months ago," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything. I don't even know how it happened." I laughed bitterly. "You don't know how it happened? Really? You accidentally fell into bed with my best friend? Spare me the excuses, Sarah. I want the truth." She wiped at her tears, her hands trembling. "It wasn't like that. We were just talking at first. You were so busy with work, and I felt lonely. Tom was there, and I made a terrible decision." "You made a choice," I said, my voice cold. "And you kept making that choice every time you lied to me, every time you went to him. How could you do this to me? To our family?" She sobbed openly now, but it didn't soften the rage coursing through me. "I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. "You didn't mean to hurt me. Sarah, you tore our family apart. And Tom? The man I trusted with everything. He held our daughters in his arms, called them his nieces. How could you both betray me like this?" She couldn't answer. She just sat there, crying, while I felt the weight of her betrayal crashing down on me. Part of me wanted to get up and walk away, to slam the door and never look back. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I looked her in the eye and asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I read those messages. "Are the girls mine?" Her head shot up, her eyes wide with horror. "Of course they're yours. How could you even ask that? Don't lie to me, Sarah. Not anymore. I need to know the truth. She swore up and down that Emma and Olivia were my daughters, but I couldn't take her word for it. Not after everything else she'd lied about. We're doing a DNA test, I said firmly. I deserve to know the truth. She nodded, defeated, and whispered, "Okay." The room was heavy with silence after that. I couldn't look at her anymore. I got up and left the house, needing to clear my head before I did something I'd regret. As I drove aimlessly around town, the reality of what had just happened hit me like a freight train. My marriage, my friendship, my entire life, it all felt like a lie. But I wasn't going to let Sarah or Tom take away the only thing that mattered to me, my daughters. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Driving around aimlessly that day, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, they all came crashing down at once, suffocating me. My chest felt tight, my hands trembled on the steering wheel, and tears blurred my vision. I pulled over into an empty parking lot and just sat there, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become my life. The image of Sarah crying at the kitchen table kept flashing in my mind, but it didn't move me. Not yet. Her tears felt like a cruel insult, as if she was mourning something she had destroyed with her own hands. And Tom, how could he? This was the man who stood beside me at my wedding, who toasted to our happiness, who was supposed to have my back no matter what. I thought about Emma and Olivia, my two little girls. They were my world, the only bright spot in an otherwise dark reality. I kept replaying Sarah's face when I asked if they were mine. Her panic. Her hesitation. Her guilt. I wanted to believe her when she said they were my daughters, but trust wasn't something I could give her anymore. The doubt was eating me alive. I stayed in that parking lot for hours, cycling through every emotion imaginable. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to erase this whole nightmare. At the same time, I felt an overwhelming sadness, a deep, hollow ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the loss of everything I thought I knew. My marriage. My friendship. My identity as a husband and father. It all felt shattered. When I finally went home, the house was eerily quiet. Sarah was in our bedroom, the door closed. I didn't want to see her. I couldn't. I slept on the couch that night, though sleep is a generous word for the few restless hours I spent tossing and turning, haunted by the questions I didn't yet have answers to. The days that followed were a blur. I barely spoke to Sarah, and when I did, it was cold and distant. The tension in the house was unbearable, but I refused to back down. I scheduled the DNA test and made it clear that we were doing it as soon as possible. She didn't argue. In fact, she seemed almost resigned to it, which only made me feel worse. If she was so sure of the results, why did she look so afraid? I threw myself into work during the day, trying to keep my mind occupied, but it didn't help. Every spare moment was consumed by thoughts of what I'd discovered. I kept imagining Tom and Sarah together, replaying the things I'd read in their messages. It was like a poison, seeping into every part of me, making it impossible to think straight. And then there were the nights, when the house was quiet and the weight of everything pressed down on me. I'd lie on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. Did I miss the signs? Was I too trusting? Too naive? The questions swirled in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal for Emma and Olivia. I didn't want them to sense that anything was wrong, so I forced myself to smile, to laugh, to be the dad they needed me to be. But every time I looked at them, I felt a pang of fear and doubt. What if they weren't mine? What if this betrayal went even deeper than I thought? I tried to prepare myself for the results of the DNA test, but the truth was, I wasn't ready for either outcome. If they were my daughters, it would mean Sarah had lied about everything else but not that. If they weren't. I didn't even want to think about what that would mean. In those days of silence and waiting, I realized how much I had taken for granted. Trust. Love. Stability. These things had always felt like constants in my life, but now, they were gone. And the worst part? I didn't know if I'd ever get them back. The day of the DNA test felt like stepping into a battlefield. I woke up early, barely able to eat or think straight. The house was silent except for the faint sounds of Emma and Olivia playing in their room. They were laughing, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. That laugh, they'd always had my laugh. I held on to that thought like a lifeline, hoping against hope that it meant something. Sarah didn't say much as we drove to the clinic. She sat stiffly in the passenger seat, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I could feel her glancing at me from time to time, probably searching for some sign of forgiveness, but I wasn't ready to give her that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. When we arrived, the nurse led us into a small, sterile room and explained the process. A simple cheek swab, they said. Quick and painless. But it didn't feel quick, and it was far from painless. Each swab felt like another layer of my life being peeled away, exposing the raw nerve of doubt that had been eating at me for days. Emma and Olivia were too young to understand why we were there, and I didn't have the heart to explain it. Sarah told them it was just a little test, and they accepted it without question. I envied their innocence, their ability to trust so completely. Once the samples were taken, the waiting began. They told us it would take a few days to get the results, but every second felt like an eternity. Sarah tried to talk to me that night, to bridge the gap that had grown between us, but I wasn't ready to listen. I know you're angry, she said, standing in the doorway of the living room where I was once again camped out on the couch. I didn't look at her. Angry doesn't even begin to cover it. I'm sorry, Mike. I know I've said it 1,000 times, but I am. I made a terrible mistake. But the girls, they're ours. I know they are. I turned to face her, my jaw tight. How can I believe anything you say, Sarah? You lied to me for months. You lied to my face while you were sneaking around with Tom. And now you expect me to take your word for it? I can't. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she looked as broken as I felt. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. Maybe you can't, I said bluntly. Maybe this is something that can't be fixed. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. She retreated to the bedroom, and I stayed where I was, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I'd ever be able to forgive her, or if I even wanted to. The next few days were torture. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted into knots, thinking it might be the clinic. When the call finally came, I almost couldn't bring myself to answer it. My hands were shaking as I pressed the phone to my ear. Mr. Reynolds, the voice on the other end said. We have the results of your DNA test. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And? The pause before she answered was the longest second of my life. The results confirm that you are the biological father of both children. Relief and grief hit me at the same time, an emotional storm that left me speechless. They were mine. Emma and Olivia were mine. But the pain of Sarah's betrayal was still there, raw and unresolved. Knowing the truth didn't erase what she had done. That night, I sat down with Sarah and told her my decision. The girls are mine, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. And I will do everything in my power to be the best father to them. But as for us, I don't know if I can forgive you. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. I understand, she said quietly. I'll stay here for now, I continued. For the girls. But we need to figure out what's next. I can't keep living like this. It wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, but it was the only one I could give. I needed time to process, to heal, to figure out what my life would look like moving forward. One thing was certain, though, no matter what happened between Sarah and me, Emma and Olivia would always be my daughters. And I would fight for them, even if I couldn't fight for my marriage. The confrontation with Tom was something I couldn't avoid, no matter how much I dreaded it. Every time I thought about him, I felt a surge of anger that threatened to consume me. This wasn't just about Sarah, this was about him too. The man I had trusted like a brother, the man who had been a part of my life for years, had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. I decided to meet him on neutral ground. Calling him felt too personal, so I sent him a text, "We need to talk. Meet me at the park tomorrow afternoon." He replied quickly, a simple sure. The brevity of his response only fueled my anger. Did he even care about what he'd done? Was he feeling any remorse? The next day, I arrived at the park early. It was quiet, with only a few people scattered across the benches and walking paths. I chose a spot away from the main area, a place where I could let my emotions out without worrying about an audience. Tom showed up a few minutes later, looking nervous but trying to play it cool. He approached me cautiously, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. "Mike," he said, his voice steady but lacking its usual warmth. "What's going on?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You know exactly what's going on," I snapped. "Don't play dumb with me, Tom." His face fell, and he shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Mike, I know I messed up." "Messed up?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You slept with my wife, Tom. You lied to my face for months. You destroyed my family. And all you can say is that you messed up." He looked down, avoiding my eyes. "I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say." "Sorry." I took a step closer to him, my fists clenched. "You're sorry. Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just betray me, you betrayed Emma and Olivia. You betrayed everything we stood for. And for what? For a few stolen moments with Sarah?" Tom finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with guilt. "It wasn't like that, Mike. It wasn't planned. It just happened." I let out a bitter laugh. "It just happened. That's your excuse. You expect me to believe that? You could have stopped it, Tom. You could have walked away. But you didn't. You kept going, and now my life is in shambles because of you." He tried to reach out, but I stepped back, my anger boiling over. "Don't," I warned. "Don't you dare try to act like the victim here. You did this. You and Sarah. You made a choice, and now you're going to live with the consequences." Tom's voice cracked as he said, "I hate myself for what I did. I wish I could take it back." "Yeah. Well, you can't," I said coldly. "You can't undo this. You can't fix this. And you can't make it right with me." The weight of my words seemed to hit him, and he looked utterly defeated. But I wasn't done. I needed him to understand just how deeply he had hurt me. "I trusted you, Tom," I said, my voice trembling. "You were my best friend. My daughters called you Uncle Tom. You were part of our family. And you threw it all away." Tears welled up in his eyes, but I didn't care. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not after everything he'd done. "I don't want to see you again," I said firmly. "You're out of my life, Tom. Out of my family's life. Do you understand me?" He nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand," he whispered. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of closure. Confronting him hadn't erased the pain, but it had given me a chance to reclaim some of my power. I couldn't control what had happened, but I could control who I allowed to stay in my life, and Tom was no longer part of it. As I drove home, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. The anger had burned bright, but now I was left with a deep, aching sadness. It was the kind of sadness that doesn't go away overnight, the kind that lingers as a reminder of what you've lost. But even in that sadness, there was a glimmer of hope. I had stood up for myself. I had drawn a line. And now, I could focus on what truly mattered, Emma, Olivia, and finding a way to rebuild my life, one piece at a time. Confronting Tom brought a small sense of closure, but the aftermath of his betrayal and Sarah's affair rippled through every part of my life. The days after our confrontation were some of the hardest I've ever endured. Every time I saw Sarah, the anger bubbled up again, a constant reminder of what she'd done. Even the sound of her voice grated on me. I avoided her as much as possible, speaking only when necessary, but the tension in the house was suffocating. The hardest part, though, was shielding Emma and Olivia from the fallout. They were too young to understand what was happening, and I was determined to keep it that way. I went out of my way to keep things normal for them, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, and pretending everything was fine when they were around. But the cracks in our family dynamic were impossible to hide completely. One evening, as I was tucking Olivia into bed, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked, "Daddy, why are you sleeping on the couch? Did you and Mommy have a fight?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I forced a smile and said, "It's nothing, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups just need a little space, but everything's okay." She seemed satisfied with the answer, but her words stayed with me long after she fell asleep. I hated lying to her, but how could I explain something so complicated and painful to a child? They didn't deserve to carry the weight of their parents' mistakes. Meanwhile, Sarah seemed to be walking on eggshells around me. She tried to make small talk, to find moments to connect, but I wasn't interested. One night, she finally broke the silence. "Mike, we need to talk," she said, her voice tentative. I looked up from the book I was pretending to read on the couch. "About what?" "About us. About everything." I closed the book and set it aside, sighing. "What's there to talk about, Sarah? You made your choices. Now we're dealing with the consequences." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her. "Not yet. I know I hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm still here, Mike. I'm still trying. Doesn't that count for something?" I stared at her, my emotions a storm I couldn't control. "You're trying. Trying to do what, Sarah? Pretend this never happened? Act like we can just go back to the way things were? It doesn't work like that." "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted, wiping at her tears. "But I love you, Mike. I love our family. I don't want to lose that." Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could somehow salvage what was left of our marriage. But the other part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, couldn't see a way forward. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. "You didn't just cheat on me, Sarah. You betrayed everything we built together. How am I supposed to trust you again?" She didn't have an answer, and I didn't expect one. The truth was, I wasn't even sure I wanted to try. The hurt ran too deep, and every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a strange, painful rhythm. We lived under the same roof, but we were no longer a couple. We were co-parents, nothing more. Sarah threw herself into trying to repair the damage, going to therapy, making grand gestures of apology, and constantly asking if there was anything she could do to make things right. But I stayed distant, unsure if her efforts were genuine or just a desperate attempt to ease her guilt. Tom, meanwhile, was completely cut out of my life. I told Sarah in no uncertain terms that he was never to come near our family again. She agreed, though I couldn't tell if it was out of guilt or fear of pushing me further away. My phone buzzed a few times with messages from him, long apologies, pleas for forgiveness, but I deleted them without reading. He didn't deserve my attention, let alone my forgiveness. The fallout extended beyond my home life. Friends who had once been mutual between Tom, Sarah, and me started to take sides, and it became clear who valued loyalty and who thrived on gossip. Some friends reached out, expressing shock and support, while others distanced themselves, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. It was like losing parts of my community one piece at a time, and the loneliness was crushing. Despite everything, one thing kept me grounded: Emma and Olivia. They were my anchor, my reason to keep going. Every time I felt overwhelmed by the pain and betrayal, I reminded myself that they needed me. No matter what happened between Sarah and me, I would always be their father, and that was something no one could take away from me. But deep down, I knew I couldn't live like this forever. The tension, the unresolved anger, the constant reminder of betrayal, it wasn't sustainable. I had to make a decision about the future, for my sake and for the girls. The question was whether that future included Sarah or if it was time to let go and start over. Making a decision about the future of my marriage wasn't something I could rush. It felt like every choice came with a tidal wave of consequences, not just for me but for Emma and Olivia. I spent countless nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what life would look like if I stayed, or if I walked away. The weight of it all was overwhelming. Staying meant trying to rebuild a shattered trust, working through the pain of betrayal, and somehow finding a way to forgive Sarah. But how could I forgive her when I could barely look at her without feeling the sting of what she had done? Walking away, on the other hand, meant uprooting my entire life, breaking apart the family my daughters loved, and starting over as a single dad. Neither path felt easy. Neither felt right. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, I sat alone in the living room with a drink in my hand, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. There we were, me, Sarah, Emma, and Olivia, smiling at the camera, looking like the perfect family. It felt like a cruel joke now, a snapshot of a life that no longer existed. Sarah walked in quietly, sitting down on the other end of the couch. She'd been giving me space, trying not to push, but I could tell she was desperate for some kind of resolution. For weeks, we'd been living in limbo, neither of us knowing what the next step would be. "Mike," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I know you're still hurting. And I know I'm the reason for that. But I need to know, what are we going to do? Where do we go from here?" I looked at her, the woman I had once loved so deeply, and felt a pang of sadness. She wasn't the same person in my eyes anymore, and I wasn't the same man. What we had was gone, and I wasn't sure if it could ever come back. "I don't know, Sarah," I admitted, my voice heavy. "I've been trying to figure that out, but every time I think about what you did, it's like I'm reliving it all over again. I don't know if I can forgive you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I don't even know if I deserve it. But Mike, I love you. I love our family. And I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, even if it takes years. I just need to know if you're willing to try." Her words hung in the air, and I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her at her word and try to rebuild what we'd lost. But the other part of me, the part that was still raw and broken, was terrified of letting her back in, only to be hurt again. "I can't give you an answer right now," I said finally. "I need time. Time to figure out what I want, what's best for the girls. But I need you to understand something, Sarah. If I stay, it's not going to be for you. It's going to be for them. And if I leave, it's not because I don't love them. It's because I can't live like this anymore." She nodded, her face etched with pain. "I understand," she whispered. The days that followed were filled with soul-searching. I talked to a therapist, trying to untangle the mess of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, betrayal, sadness, love, all of it was there, fighting for space in my heart. The therapist didn't have all the answers, but they helped me see one thing clearly: no matter what I decided, it was okay to put myself first for once. One night, after the girls had gone to bed, I sat down with Sarah and told her my decision. My heart was pounding, and I could barely find the words, but I knew I couldn't keep her in the dark any longer. "Sarah," I began, my voice steady but firm. "I've thought about this from every angle, and I've made my choice. I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend like everything is okay when it's not. I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumpled, and she let out a sob that cut straight to my heart. "Mike, please," she begged. "We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can." I held up my hand to stop her. "I've made up my mind. This isn't just about what you did, Sarah. It's about what I need. And what I need is to move on." The words felt like a weight lifting off my chest, even as her tears flowed freely. I hated seeing her in pain, but I couldn't let her guilt or regret dictate my life anymore. I had spent too long trying to hold on to something that was already broken. It was time to let go. The next morning, I started the process of contacting a lawyer and figuring out the logistics of separating our lives. It wasn't easy. The girls would have questions, and I dreaded the day I'd have to sit them down and explain everything. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could find peace again. Telling Emma and Olivia about the divorce was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I'd spent days agonizing over how to explain something so complicated to two little girls who saw their family as unshakable. They were too young to understand betrayal, too innocent to grasp the weight of what Sarah and I were going through. But I couldn't keep them in the dark forever. They deserved honesty, at least as much as they could handle. Sarah and I agreed to tell them together. For all her faults, she loved the girls, and we both wanted to shield them from as much pain as possible. That evening, we sat down in the living room, Emma curled up with her favorite stuffed bear and Olivia already sensing that something was wrong. Kids have an uncanny ability to pick up on tension, even when you try to hide it. I started, my voice calm but shaky. "Girls, your mom and I need to talk to you about something very important." Olivia frowned, clutching her blanket. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," I said quickly. "You're not in trouble. This isn't about you. It's about Mom and me." Emma's face scrunched in confusion. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath and spoke softly. "Sometimes, grown-ups have a hard time getting along, even when they love each other. And when that happens, they might decide it's better to live apart." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the girls just stared at us, processing. Then Emma's eyes widened, and her voice broke as she asked, "Are you getting divorced?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes, sweetheart. Your mom and I have decided that we're going to live in separate houses. But I need you to know that this has nothing to do with you or Olivia. We both love you very much, and that's never going to change." Tears filled Emma's eyes as she whispered, "But why? Why can't you stay together?" I looked at Sarah, hoping she could help answer the question, but she was already crying. So, I took a deep breath and tried to explain as gently as I could. "Sometimes, people change," I said. "And when that happens, they might not be able to be the best version of themselves if they stay together. Your mom and I want to make sure we're both happy and able to take care of you the best way we can. This decision doesn't mean we don't love each other or you. It just means we need to do things differently." Olivia, who had been silent up until now, suddenly burst into tears. "I don't want you to leave, Daddy," she cried, throwing herself into my arms. Her sobs broke me. I held her close, my heart aching as I whispered, "I'm not leaving you, Olivia. I'm always going to be here for you, no matter what. You'll see me all the time, I promise." Emma's voice was trembling as she asked, "Does this mean we'll have two homes?" "Yes," Sarah said gently. "You'll have a home with Daddy and a home with me. We'll make sure they're both places where you feel safe and loved." The conversation went on for what felt like hours. They had so many questions, so many fears. Would they still see both of us? Would we still spend birthdays and holidays together? Would we ever be a family again? Each question was like a knife to the heart, but I answered them honestly, assuring them that no matter what happened, they would always be our top priority. When they finally went to bed, exhausted from crying, I sat on the couch, feeling utterly drained. Sarah sat across from me, her face tear-streaked and pale. "I hate that we had to do that," she said softly. "I hate that we've hurt them." "So do I replied, my voice heavy. "But staying together just to avoid this would have hurt them even more in the long run." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. For the first time in weeks, we weren't arguing or trading accusations. We were just two broken people trying to figure out how to navigate the mess we'd created. In the days that followed, we tried to keep things as normal as possible for the girls. We stuck to routines, made time for family dinners, and reassured them constantly that they were loved. But the reality of the situation was impossible to ignore. The house felt heavier, quieter, as if the walls themselves were mourning the loss of what once was. Despite the pain, I knew I had made the right choice. I wasn't sure what the future would look like, but I was determined to make it a good one, for me and, most importantly, for Emma and Olivia. They were my world, and no matter how difficult things got, I would never stop fighting for them. The day I moved out was bittersweet. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, but it also forced me to confront the finality of everything. Packing my belongings felt like dismantling the life I'd spent years building, a piece-by-piece undoing of a family that once felt whole. I didn't take much at first. I wanted the girls to have stability, and uprooting everything in the house didn't feel right. Most of my clothes, a few personal items, and some furniture were all I packed. I wasn't just leaving a house, I was leaving a version of myself behind. Sarah and I decided to tell Emma and Olivia about the move as gently as possible. We explained that I would be living in a new home but that they would still see me often. "It's not goodbye," I told them. "It's just a new way for us to be a family." They both took it hard. Emma was quiet, her eyes glassy as she stared at the floor. Olivia, on the other hand, clung to me like her life depended on it. "I don't want you to go, Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll never be far," I reassured her, holding her close. "You can call me anytime you want. And you'll get to come to my new place and make it feel like home too." The moving day itself was surreal. The house was filled with the usual noise of the girls playing, but there was an undercurrent of tension. Sarah stayed out of my way for the most part, though we exchanged a few awkward words when we crossed paths. It was clear we were both trying to avoid making the day harder than it already was. My new place was a small two-bedroom apartment not far from the house. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I spent the first night sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes, trying to process everything. The silence was deafening. No laughter from the girls, no familiar sounds of home, just me, alone with my thoughts. Over the next few weeks, I worked on making the apartment feel like home, not just for me but for Emma and Olivia too. I let them help decorate their room, picking out bedding, posters, and little trinkets to make it theirs. Seeing their excitement as they made the space their own was a small but powerful reminder that, even in the midst of all this change, there were still moments of joy. Visitation became a routine. Every weekend, they stayed with me, and I tried to make the time special. We'd bake cookies, have movie nights, and go on little adventures around town. I wanted them to feel like nothing had changed between us, even though everything had. One night, as we were watching a movie, Emma turned to me and asked, "Do you miss living at home?" The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. "I do," I said. "I miss seeing you and Olivia every day. But I think this is better for all of us." "Why?" she pressed, her little face serious. "Because sometimes, when grown-ups live together and they aren't happy, it can make everyone unhappy, I explained. This way, your mom and I can both focus on being the best parents for you. And we'll both always love you, no matter where we live. She seemed to think about that for a moment before nodding. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Emma, I said, my heart swelling with emotion. Always. As hard as it was to move out, I began to realize that it was the right decision. The distance gave me space to heal and start figuring out who I was outside of the roles of husband and father. It wasn't easy, there were nights when the loneliness was unbearable, when the silence felt like a punishment. But there were also moments of peace, moments when I felt like I was finally taking control of my life again. Sarah and I kept things civil for the girls' sake. We communicated when we needed to, coordinating schedules and discussing important decisions about Emma and Olivia. It wasn't friendly, but it was functional. And for now, that was enough. Moving out was the first step in reclaiming my life. It wasn't perfect, and the road ahead was still uncertain, but I was learning to find strength in the small victories. One box unpacked, one smile from the girls, one moment of clarity, all reminders that, even in the aftermath of heartbreak, there was still hope. Rebuilding my life after moving out wasn't just a physical process, it was an emotional and mental one, too. For so long, my identity had been tied to my roles as a husband and father, but now I was forced to reevaluate who I was outside of those labels. It was daunting, but it was also an opportunity to rediscover myself. At first, everything felt strange. The apartment was quiet, almost eerily so, especially on the nights Emma and Olivia were with Sarah. I hadn't been alone in years, and the silence was a stark contrast to the chaos of family life. Some nights, I found myself pacing the apartment, unsure of what to do with myself. Other nights, I sat in front of the TV, barely paying attention to what was on, lost in my thoughts. But slowly, I started to find a rhythm. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep busy and distract myself from the loneliness. It wasn't just about filling time, it was about proving to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet again. Each day, I found a little more confidence, a little more clarity. Spending time with Emma and Olivia became my anchor. Every weekend, I planned activities to make our time together special. We went to the zoo, painted pottery, and even took a day trip to a nearby lake. Their laughter was a balm for my wounded heart, a reminder that no matter how much had changed, my role as their dad was the one constant I could hold on to. One weekend, as we were having a picnic at the park, Olivia looked up at me and asked, "Do you like your new house, Daddy?" I smiled at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I do. But you know what makes it even better?" "What?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Having you and Emma there. You two make it feel like home." She grinned and leaned against me, and in that moment, I felt like I was finally doing something right. Outside of my time with the girls, I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I joined a gym, not just to get in shape but to clear my mind. The physical activity was cathartic, a way to channel the anger and frustration that still lingered. I also started reconnecting with old friends, the ones who had stuck by me through the fallout with Sarah and Tom. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that there were still people in my corner. Therapy became a lifeline during this time. Talking to someone who wasn't emotionally invested in the situation helped me untangle the complicated web of emotions I was dealing with. My therapist didn't just help me process the betrayal, they helped me understand myself better. I learned to set boundaries, to communicate more effectively, and, most importantly, to forgive myself for not seeing the signs earlier. Forgiveness, for Sarah, for Tom, and even for myself, was the hardest part of rebuilding. I wasn't there yet, but I was learning that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing what had happened. It meant letting go of the anger and resentment so that I could move forward. It was a slow process, but each step felt like progress. One unexpected part of rebuilding was Jackie, my longtime assistant at work. She had been a quiet but steady presence in my life, offering support without judgment. She never pried, but her kindness and understanding were a comfort during some of my darkest moments. Over time, our conversations grew deeper, and I found myself looking forward to seeing her each day. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Jackie stopped by my office as I was packing up. "You look like you could use a break," she said with a small smile. I chuckled. "You're not wrong." She hesitated for a moment before asking, "Want to grab a coffee?" "No work talk, I promise." It was a simple offer, but something about it felt significant. I agreed, and what started as a casual coffee turned into a 3-hour conversation about everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope, not just for my future as a father, but for myself as a person. Rebuilding my life was messy and unpredictable, but it was also empowering. With each passing day, I felt more like myself, stronger, more resilient, and ready to face whatever came next. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I was starting to believe that brighter days were ahead. Rebuilding my life had been a process of moving forward, but as much as I wanted to focus on the future, I knew I couldn't fully heal without facing the unresolved pieces of my past. The ghosts of betrayal and heartbreak still lingered, casting long shadows over my progress. I'd made peace with some of it, but there was still one thing I couldn't ignore: Sarah. We had settled into a co-parenting routine that was civil, even amicable at times, but there was an unspoken tension between us. Conversations were limited to schedules, school events, and logistics about Emma and Olivia. We avoided anything deeper, as if acknowledging the pain would make it unbearable again. But the silence between us was heavy, and I knew it couldn't last forever. One evening, after dropping the girls off at Sarah's house, I lingered at the door. She looked surprised, her hand hovering over the doorknob. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No," I said, shaking my head. "But we need to talk." Her expression shifted to one of cautious understanding. "Okay. Come in." I followed her into the living room, a place that had once felt like home but now felt foreign. The memories here were too loud: family game nights, Christmas mornings, quiet moments on the couch. They were reminders of what had been lost. Sarah sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I stayed standing, pacing the room as I tried to gather my thoughts. Finally, I stopped and faced her. "We can't keep pretending everything's fine," I said. "I've tried to focus on the girls and move forward, but there's still so much we haven't addressed. And I can't keep carrying this weight around." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I know. I've been waiting for this conversation, but I didn't want to push you." I took a deep breath. "Why, Sarah? Why did you do it?" The question hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. She looked down, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I've asked myself that a million times," she said softly. "And I don't know if I'll ever have a good answer. I was lonely, Mike. You were working so much, and I felt invisible. But that doesn't excuse what I did. I made a terrible choice, and I hate myself for it." "You should," I said bluntly, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. "You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our family. You took everything we built and threw it away." Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But I pushed it aside. I needed to say these things. I needed her to hear them. "I loved you, Sarah," I continued. "I trusted you. And you destroyed that. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? To the girls?" "I know," she choked out. "I think about it every day. I can't take back what I did, but I wish I could. I wish I could undo all of it." Her remorse was palpable, but it didn't erase the pain. It didn't change what had happened. "The thing is," I said, my voice softening, "I don't hate you anymore. I did for a while, but carrying that hate around only made things worse. I've started to let it go, not for you, but for me. Her head shot up, and she looked at me with a mixture of hope and sadness. Does that mean you forgive me? I hesitated. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you. But I don't want to live in the past anymore. What you did will always hurt, but I can't let it define me. And I can't let it define our relationship as co-parents. She nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. And I want you to know that I'll keep trying to make things right, even if it's just by being a better mom to the girls. I sat down across from her, the tension in the room easing slightly. That's all I want, Sarah. For Emma and Olivia to have two parents who love them and who can work together for their sake. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation slowly lifting. It wasn't closure, not entirely, but it was a step toward healing. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page, even if we were no longer partners. As I left her house that night, I felt lighter. Facing the past hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. It was the only way to truly move forward, to let go of the pain and start embracing the life I was building. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, I felt ready to face them. Facing the past had been like shedding a heavy weight, and with it gone, I finally felt free to focus on the future. It was uncharted territory, a life I had to rebuild from the ground up. But for the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel hopeful, not just for myself but for Emma and Olivia, too. One of the biggest steps forward came in the form of Jackie. What had started as coffee after work had turned into a regular thing, and before long, it became something more. Jackie had this way of making me feel seen, understood, and respected, things I hadn't realized I'd been missing for so long. She never pried about my past, but she listened when I chose to share. With her, I didn't feel like the guy whose wife cheated on him or the single dad trying to keep it together. I felt like just me. Our relationship unfolded slowly and naturally, which was exactly what I needed. She met Emma and Olivia after a few months, once I was sure it was serious. I was nervous about how they'd react, but Jackie was amazing with them. She didn't try to replace their mom or force a connection, they just clicked in a way that felt genuine and easy. One evening, as we were all baking cookies in my tiny apartment kitchen, Emma looked up at me and said, "Jackie's fun. Can she come over more?" Jackie laughed, brushing flour off her hands. "Only if it's okay with your dad." I smiled, my heart full in a way I hadn't felt in years. "I think we can make that happen." Building something new with Jackie was one part of my new beginning, but there were other changes, too. Work had become more fulfilling now that I wasn't just using it as a distraction. I started taking on projects I was passionate about, and my colleagues noticed a shift in me. They said I seemed more focused, more confident. Maybe they were right. I also found myself reconnecting with old hobbies. I dusted off my guitar, which had been sitting in the corner for years, and started playing again. It felt good to create something, to lose myself in the music for a while. Emma and Olivia loved it, too. Every weekend they'd beg me to play their favorite songs, and soon enough, we had a little tradition of concert nights in the living room. One day, while we were driving back from the park, Olivia asked, "Are you happy now, Daddy?" Her question caught me off guard. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her big eyes watching me intently. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" She shrugged. "You smile more now. And you laugh a lot. You didn't do that before." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I managed a smile. "Yeah, Olivia. I think I am happy." And I meant it. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was mine again. I had my girls, my health, and the beginnings of a new relationship that felt real and honest. Most importantly, I had learned that I was stronger than I'd ever realized. My relationship with Sarah had also settled into something healthier. We weren't friends, exactly, but we'd become a team for Emma and Olivia. We communicated better now than we ever had during our marriage, and while the pain of her betrayal would never fully go away, it no longer controlled me. She seemed to have found some peace, too, focusing on being the best mom she could be. One evening, after dropping the girls off at Sarah's house, I lingered for a moment. She looked at me curiously. "What's up?" "Nothing," I said, shaking my head with a small smile. "Just, thank you. For working with me on this. For being a good mom." She smiled back, a little surprised. "Thank you, Mike. For not giving up on the girls, even when I gave you every reason to." It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was the closest we'd come to it. And that was enough for me. Rediscovering joy didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like the first rays of sunlight after a long, dark night. It started with little things, moments of laughter with Emma and Olivia, quiet nights with Jackie, and the feeling of accomplishment when I saw the life I was rebuilding taking shape. Each small victory was a reminder that happiness was still possible, even after everything I'd been through. One of the most joyful changes came from embracing the things that made me feel alive again. Playing guitar had become more than just a hobby, it was a way to reconnect with myself. I started playing at local open mics, something I hadn't done since my 20s. It was nerve-wracking at first, but the warmth of the audience and the rush of performing brought back a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. Emma and Olivia became my biggest fans. They'd beg me to practice in the living room, dancing around and making silly requests. One night, Emma said, "You should write a song about us." "I think I will," I told her, and I meant it. A few weeks later, I surprised them with a simple song about how much they meant to me. Watching their faces light up as I sang was one of the happiest moments of my life. Spending time outdoors also became a source of joy. The girls and I started going on hikes, exploring nearby trails, and having picnics by the lake. One day, as we sat by the water skipping stones, Olivia looked up at me and said, "This is the best day ever." "What makes it the best?" I asked, smiling. "Because we're all together," she said simply. Her words stayed with me. Despite the changes in our family, Emma and Olivia were thriving. They didn't care about the size of our house or how perfect things looked on the outside. What mattered to them was love, and I was determined to give them as much of it as I could. Jackie became a bigger part of our lives, too. She'd join us for hikes, help with school projects, and even teach the girls how to bake. They adored her, and seeing them bond with her filled me with a quiet happiness I hadn't expected. Jackie never tried to replace Sarah, and I admired how careful she was to respect our family dynamic. She fit into our lives naturally, like she'd been meant to be there all along. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Jackie and I sat on the balcony of my apartment, sipping coffee and watching the city lights. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You seem lighter these days." "I feel lighter," I admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not just surviving. I'm actually living." She smiled, her eyes warm. "You've come a long way, Mike. And you're a good dad. The girls are lucky to have you." Her words meant more to me than I could say. For so long, I doubted myself, my worth, my ability to move forward, my role as a father. But now, I was beginning to see the strength that had carried me through it all. Joy wasn't just about the big moments, it was in the small, everyday things. It was in Emma and Olivia's laughter, in the warmth of Jackie's hand in mine, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was building a life I could be proud of. One night, as I tucked the girls into bed, Emma whispered, "Daddy, are you happy now?" Her question was simple, but it carried so much weight. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "Yes, Emma," I said, brushing her hair back. "I really am." And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just saying it to convince myself. I meant it. Closure wasn't something that arrived with a grand epiphany. It came slowly, like the way a wound heals, not all at once, but little by little, until one day you realize the pain isn't as sharp, the scar isn't as tender. And when I finally found closure, it wasn't because everything was resolved or perfect. It was because I'd made peace with what was and allowed myself to embrace what could be. The official divorce papers were finalized a few months after I moved out. It was a strange, bittersweet moment. Holding that document in my hands felt like both an ending and a beginning. I was no longer Sarah's husband, no longer tied to the life we had built together. But I was also free to rebuild, to start fresh, and to focus on what truly mattered. Sarah and I had one final conversation after the papers were signed. We met at a coffee shop, away from the girls and the familiar walls of our shared past. She looked nervous, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly, breaking the silence. "For giving me a chance to be better. For being a good father to the girls, even when I didn't deserve your kindness." Her words were genuine, and for the first time, I felt no anger toward her. Only a quiet understanding. "You're a good mom, Sarah," I said. "And I'll always be grateful for the family we had. But I think we're both better off where we are now." She nodded, tears in her eyes, but she smiled. It was a goodbye of sorts, not just to each other, but to the weight of everything we'd been carrying. For Emma and Olivia, life started to feel normal again. They thrived in the stability of their routines, knowing they were loved no matter what. Sarah and I worked hard to co-parent effectively, and it wasn't always easy, but we made it work. The girls were our priority, and that shared goal kept us grounded. My relationship with Jackie continued to grow. She became my partner in every sense of the word, supporting me, encouraging me, and loving me for who I was. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "Have you thought about writing again?" It was a question that took me by surprise. Writing had been a passion of mine years ago, something I'd abandoned when life got too busy. But now, the idea sparked something in me. I admitted. "I just don't know where to start." "Start with your story," she said simply. "It's worth telling." Her encouragement stayed with me, and over the next few months, I began writing about my journey, the pain, the betrayal, the healing, and the rediscovery of hope. It was cathartic, a way to process everything I'd been through and share the lessons I'd learned. Eventually, that writing became a book, one that I self-published and shared with the world. The response was overwhelming. People reached out, sharing their own stories of heartbreak and resilience, thanking me for putting into words what they'd struggled to express. For the first time, I felt like my pain had a purpose. It wasn't just something that had happened to me, it was something I could use to help others. Life wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. I had learned that joy and pain could coexist, that healing wasn't linear, and that love, real, honest love, was still possible. Emma and Olivia continued to grow, their laughter filling my life with light. Jackie became a part of our family in a way that felt effortless and right. One night, as we all sat around the dinner table, Olivia blurted out, "Daddy, this is the happiest we've ever been, isn't it?" Her words caught me off guard, but as I looked around the table, at Jackie, at Emma and Olivia, at the life we had built, I realized she was right. "Yes, sweetheart," I said with a smile. "I think it is." And for the first time, I wasn't just moving forward, I was exactly where I was meant to be.